many caregivers do we have in the audience right now? Can we have a hand for all of these people, please? About 5 or 6 months ago, Laura and I were walking on the beach of South Boston, and she looked up at me. She was all done with her active treatments, and she looked up through one dying eye, and she said, "This has been the worst time of my life." And of course, my job as a caregiver is to respond. And I said, I beg to differ. And so she looked at me as if I had two heads and said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "You just beat cancer, dude. You just beat cancer." And that, to me, summed up the role that we play as caregivers in that knowing how to respond and when to respond. And caregiving is defined as providing regular assistance to a child, a chronically ill patient, an adult, a spouse, whatever. And it's probably one of the hardest jobs in the world. And we've got a few tips that we can offer up to those of you who may unfortunately have to walk into that position. And it, as we were discussing the other night with Angela and Alicia, it starts with communication. And you need, as a caregiver, you need to be able to open up those channels of communication with the patient. An awful lot of patients don't necessarily volunteer that information. So you need to know how to read and how to prod and how to ask questions, etc. And you need to know how to respond and when to respond. You also need to recognize that the final decision is the patient. It's not yours. And so typically we try to do an awful lot. We find that it's a very, very rewarding job, but it's taxing as heck. And as caregivers out here, you're all familiar with what you run up against with regards to a patient. Now, this is my co-equal partner in crime, Laura, who's the Chief Executive Officer and founder of SurvivingBreastCancer.org, who I work with extensively. And right in the middle of her treatments, and it started with her surgery. I came to the hospital with multiple vases of flowers, etc. And I bought fresh flowers for the house virtually every other day, so that there was always fresh flowers in the house. And about 7 or 8 weeks into the program, she looked up at me and she said, "Man, those flowers are pretty nice. Where'd they come from?" And I said, "Honey, you didn't recognize that those flowers have been here in one form or another for the last 2 months?" And she said, "No, I didn't." And so that brought home a couple of points, that typically the cancer patient is occupying a different space than we as caregivers know. And it's a different region completely, unless you yourself are a cancer patient or chronically ill or whatever. And that we find that ultimately that's the difficulty of knowing how to respond and when to respond. But you just need to be able to tug at the heartstrings and know how to push it. And as Laura's caregiver, I went up against her parents a number of times. Her mother, who's just a wonderful, wonderful lady and a great caregiver. She's a registered nurse in Chicago, and she wanted to move Laura to a different hospital. We're in Boston. We're surrounded by some of the greatest hospitals in the world. And her mother wanted her to go to one of those larger, more factory-type hospitals. And we were at a smaller hospital with a world-renowned oncologist who was leading leading the charge into Laura's resolution. And we love this guy to death. He's just simply incredible. And Laura's mom got into it with us at one of our favorite restaurants in the city, and she was really pushing against Laura, and finally I put my foot down and less than respectfully told her to bugger off, that the reality is it's the patient's decision. Laura has her doctorate. She's very, very smart. She does great research. And her mother was kind of stepping on the wrong person. And so she continued to fight with me. And then the conversation went downhill in a hurry. And then, and I love this gal to death, don't get me wrong. So Laura ultimately prevailed, and we stayed with our team. And that brings to the next step with regards to some helpful hinters for the caregiver, and that is to say, help with the medical translation. If you can attend, if you can drive the patient to the meetings with the oncologist or the radiologist, whatever, then do so and be prepared as much as possible. Now, Laura always did her due diligence. Going in, we had a list of 20 questions, and I have to give our oncologist all the credit in the world, because he had such an incredible bedside manner, and he saw how earnest Laura was with regards to her treatment, wanting to improve upon her health and whatnot. And so he would sit there and he would listen to every single question. He would never do this. He would never check his watch, and it didn't matter if there was another patient behind. He was incredible. He actually started to schedule us a little bit later so that we never interrupted another patient. But lastly, while you're there, take notes. I mean, there's an awful lot going on in the life of a patient and a caregiver, particularly during the decision-making process. And as I mentioned earlier, the decision's not yours as the caregiver, but you can certainly offer support and assistance with regards to that decision-making process. And that's part and parcel of what we can do. The other thing was, while we were going through this, and I highly recommend it to anybody, take on some of those necessary tasks that are basic to everyone's life. Cleaning the house, doing the dishes, picking up the groceries, cooking, making sure that the patient gets his or her fair share of rest, and that everyone stays focused on that. I know historically we always held a number of parties at our condo in Boston, and Laura's not the type of a person that would ever kick anybody out of the house. But as soon as I see the eyelids starting to drop a little bit, I would simply get up and say, "That's it, everyone, time to go home." And that includes her parents, if they were at our house. And her father would stand up and say, "I can appreciate that," and he would just walk out, and most people do, most people will. So I think that typically, if you can perform some of those mundane tasks and take away some of that issue from the patient, you're really offering an awful lot of assistance to them, and it allows them to stay focused on what they really need to do in order to overcome the cancer or the chronic illness that they're going through. That being said, we've been recording podcasts all morning and into the afternoon. I think we've probably got 18 completed already. We welcome everybody over there. One of the people that to just speak with us, if you're a survivor, if you're a caregiver, we'd like to hear your story. We publish weekly stories with regards to survivor stories, with regards to blogs, medical advances. We do podcasts. We publish those on a weekly basis, and we publish a newsletter. And you're more than welcome to join. There's no cost. We don't ask our peeps for any cash. We do ask Big Pharma. We do ask some of the large suppliers to donate as much as possible, so that we can continue to do what we do best. That being said, with regards to the podcasting, we had a very interesting conversation with a young lady that I'd like to invite up for a couple of minutes so that she can talk to us about her role as a caregiver. So Connie, if you'd like to join me. Connie, I'll hold your dog. How about a hand for Connie? Nice shirt, by the way.
Thank you. Hi, I'd just like to say I'm Connie. I'm a survivor of 19 years, and I cared for my husband for the last 5 years. And 2 months ago, he passed. He always looked forward to being here, seeing all the survivors, walking the laps, and enjoying the company. Caring for him was one of the hardest jobs I have ever had, besides being a survivor. Towards the end, I wouldn't ask him, what do you want to eat? Or do you want your meds? It was, well, we're gonna have this for dinner, or you can have this, or you can have this. I gave him 3 choices. Towards the end, he refused his meds. No big deal. He slept more. I cleaned toilets. I made beds. I gave showers. A caregiver is a hard job. It's an outstanding job. Don't feel like you're nothing, because you are. You're my heart. You're my soul. You're the person that I depend on for everyday living. So, when I cared for my husband, I was proud. And all of you should be proud too.
Last but not least, little bit of advice. When you're jumping onto an airplane and just before you're about to depart, the stewardess will be addressing the safety needs inside the airplane, and they'll talk to you about how to buckle your seatbelt and where the exit doors are, what the strategy is, etc. And then they talk about the oxygen masks. And one of the things that they really harp on is that if you're taking care of someone else in that plane, put your oxygen mask on first. And the same rule applies to the caregiver. Take care of yourself. Some of the best advice that we received, we were doing a meet and greet down in Miami, Florida, and it was a paint night for survivors. We had a bunch of stage 3 and 4 survivors come, and while the paint was drying, one of the stage 4 survivors brought her father in, who is a social worker, and his wife is a 15-year survivor, and he had this to say, that he's in the medical field, and he had a medical friend call him every 2 weeks, and the medical friend would ask him, how are you doing? And he would just immediately start talking about his wife. And the medical friend said, I didn't call about your wife, I called about you. How are you doing? So I will close by saying that, recall my conversations with Laura's mom. She was the one that was calling me on the side, not to talk to Laura, but to talk to me to make sure that I was okay. And she just knew what I was going through, and hats off to her. So if there's any questions, we'd be happy to field them. If not, I love this place. I think this is phenomenal what's going on here, and I want to thank everybody for having us.